Good afternoon, everyone, and happy Friday. Welcome to our next installment of PNACAC's Happy Hour webinar series, Admissions in the Time of COVID. My name is Sarah Seaborg, and I'm the Professional Development Co-Chair for PNACAC. And I'm joined by 4 admissions professionals, Jocelyn DeJong, Sue Corner, Kelly Talbert, and Chado Hazelbaker. I will have them introduce themselves in just a moment. But wanted to take this opportunity to welcome you. And I'll just mention that behind the scenes, we also have PNACAC President Patrick Wilson, who's helping with some of the behind the scenes things this afternoon. So first things I want to do is just go over a little bit of housekeeping. So this webinar is a bit different than previous webinars that we've done with PNACAC, and that this is set up as a meeting, not a webinar. There will be an option for audience participation in the second half of this meeting. The format of today's presentation will be that I will ask our panelists to discuss a couple of topics that we've already set up. And then once our panelists have responded to both of those options, I will open it up for discussion, comments, conversation, and I'll provide a bit more guidance once we get to that point. While the panelists are talking, I'll just ask that you remain muted and know that we'll have an opportunity for engagement in a bit. And then I'm also going to be sharing a short survey in the chat that I invite you to fill out at the conclusion of this presentation, but I'm just seeking input for additional topics that you all may be interested in for future webinars. So I'll post it in the chat a couple of times and just ask that once this has concluded that you take a few minutes to fill that out. And then my additional reminder is that this will be recorded and we'll have it available on the PNACAC YouTube channel next week. So if you want to share it with colleagues or rewatch any parts that you may have missed, please take advantage of that as well. So without further ado, I will let our speakers introduce themselves and then we'll jump into the panel questions. So I'll go ahead and start with Jocelyn.
Well, first off, Sarah, I didn't know this was a happy hour. I clearly do not have the right drink. I've got water. But hi, everyone. I'm Jocelyn DeYoung. I serve as the Senior Associate Director of Admissions for Recruitment and Communications at the University of Washington, and it's a pleasure to be with you this Friday afternoon.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sue Corner. I'm the Director of Recruitment at Willamette University. I didn't get the memo about the happy hour part either. So Jocelyn, we'll just drink our glasses of water together. Nice to be here.
Good afternoon. Happy Friday. I'm Kelly Talbert. I serve as the Director of Admissions at Boise State University. Also no memo, I've got a Diet Dr. Pepper. See if I can step away and do better than that. Good to be with you all.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Chado Hazelbaker. I'm the Vice President of Enrollment Management Marketing here at Carroll College in Helena, Montana.
So the first question for our panelists to discuss is what looks different this year for your office and the students you serve, and what is your office doing specifically to serve students, counselors, and families? So we'll just go in that same order of introduction. So we'll let Jocelyn start.
Sure. Well, like many of your offices, I'm sure, everything looks very different. Like, for example, I'm here in my basement, sitting at home, so we're not on campus. Yeah, everything went virtual for us at the University of Washington. I will say one of the new programs that in an effort in the spring, normally we see a lot of visitors on campus, and throughout the summer, we see upwards of 5,000 or more folks coming to Seattle and wanting to tour campus. And in an effort to recoup some of those lost leads that we otherwise would have had, we started to put some content online, and we dubbed them Washington Wednesdays, and we did some topical programs around the college search process, admissions in light of COVID, what it means to no longer require standardized test scores, honors program, all sorts of things. We did 13 programs, and we were able to get in front of about 7,000 students and parents. So that was a new program that we implemented, and quite honestly, something we'll probably continue to do and tweak as time goes on, even when we are back on campus. But that's just one example.
Yeah, that question is so relevant. What doesn't look different right now? I feel like everything about our jobs on both sides of the desk have had to be reinvented in the last many months. So lots of things look different. So that we're not all repetitive in what we're talking about on the panel, I'll mention just one program that that we've implemented this fall, which was a counselor roundtable series. So we and we just had no idea when we put this out there whether it would be effective or not, or helpful for anyone. But our idea was to do a series of 5 just short events for high school counselors to have an opportunity to come together virtually around topics that are relevant right now. So we presented just a tiny bit of content at the beginning, just kind of to get the conversation going. And then we broke out into separate rooms so that there could be small conversation around these relevant conversation topics for counselors. And I think we certainly learned a great deal at Willamette, just hearing counselors talk about what was top of mind for them and for the parents and students that they were working with. That it was really, really helpful for us to get to be a part of those conversations. I think at the time, this was in, early September through just last week. I think those early programs especially helped counselors have a place to just share information. It was early enough in the fall that people were still really trying to figure out different tools and strategies. And so we hope that it was helpful to them too. So just one of many things that I think we've tried this fall that has been effective.
Right. I mean, again, in the spirit of sharing maybe slightly different perspectives, everything looks different here at Boise State as well for the team. One thing that we've been able to do is kind of stand up a virtual group visit experience. We so love having younger students, elementary school, middle school students come to campus. For many of them, it's their first experience with the college campus, many of our first generation. So one fun thing that we've been able to do is convert those group visits into virtual visits. Obviously, not the same as being in person, but it's fun. We're able to kind of give them a creative menu of options, a bit of a choose your own adventure type of thing. And so they can build a day in a virtual program that works best for them, depending on, age and grade level appropriate and what they'd like to learn about. They can choose a student panel, they can do a virtual tour, information sessions. So we have a very enthusiastic Bronco Ambassador group of volunteer current students who have been able to, stay engaged with us that way through that programming. So that's been fun. And Sarah, I know one thing I think on this talking point that we were maybe going to touch on too was just our approach to testing and that sort of thing. And so that might be something that we circle back to. And I can just share from Boise State's perspective, that's one just in terms of service to students and flexibility in this time. We went the approach of going test blind for fall of 2021 for admission and scholarships as well. So just if that's helpful to know about that piece, I know that's something on people's minds.
Yeah, and here at Carroll College, the situation has changed a lot over just the last month. Again, not to be repetitive with what people have said, a lot of virtual visits, a lot of online options, but we were actually in a pretty good visit situation until about 3 weeks ago. And then really you saw Montana's numbers change pretty significantly. But the big way that it changes is no programming. Still doing individual visits, but those are pretty small, one family at a time. Obviously that was as we started to talk with football coaches and track coaches and particularly those coaches that were used to bringing in large groups, or we did typically have 4 or 5, group visit programs throughout the fall. We had a couple of high schools that would typically bring their whole high school to visit. None of that happened. So really the visit experience has gotten really intimate, which is not a bad thing for a college the size of Carroll, and really relatively recruiting very relatively small numbers compared to some of the other schools here. But, so that's one way that we really changed the experience. It's been much more intimate. And I think there's advantages and disadvantages to that. On one hand, it's great that they're sitting down one family at a time. On the other hand, you don't get that same excitement that you get necessarily from a group visit. That's changed quite a bit in the last couple of weeks. We actually had to move one visit program actually to online because of the increased number of cases in Montana. But so I think flexibility is a kind of a byword right now. And then the only other thing that we've done that I just haven't heard anybody hit on yet, but I'm sure we're all doing some version of, is we really have increased our outreach to parents. And so probably we had a series of 5 parent evening Zoom calls, each focused on a different area. One was specifically on admissions process. One was specifically on financial aid. We actually had one on housing and living on campus that I was very surprised at the number of parents that tuned into and had good questions. So, I guess I would say I'm a little worried we're creating some monsters because I think that, we've all know that there's some challenges in working with parents throughout the process, but those have been, I think, important pieces. And then just to sort of hit on that, what Kelly said about testing. We have been test optional for a couple of years here at Carroll, but we did lower the GPA requirement. Be test optional, it used to be 3.0. We lowered it to 7.5. It's a 1-year switch for us, but it will be really interesting to see, how well that does serve families overall. It's just it's the everyday decision making that is, I think, just trying to serve families and students the best that we can.
Before I move to our next question, do any of the panelists want to add anything additional to this question?
Yeah, just to Chado's point about the parent information wasn't something we were collecting and are now doing so that we can communicate. But in the absence of having like an email address for a parent, we've been doing more mailings. So one of our biggest concerns at the UW is our ability to recruit underrepresented students. What we're experiencing when we're doing virtual visits and virtual college fairs is that the schools with the means and those students continue to show up and maybe even more so than in years past, whereas the communities and the schools that we serve that are more low income, under-resourced, we're not able to get in front of those students. So it's a big concern from an access perspective. So having those mailings go into the home directly is our attempt to get in front of the families as well. So I wanted to add that. And then Kelly, thanks. We totally forgot. We said we were going to talk about our testing policies. And at the UW, we removed the requirement for the SAT or ACT indefinitely. So it was something we had been looking at pre-COVID and we're able to implement in June of this year. So for autumn 2021.
Yeah, looping back on the test score part. Thanks, Kelly. Willamette is test optional, and we have been for a number of years. Students are welcome to submit scores if they have them and they would like to. They will not factor into the aid decision, but if they would like us to see test scores for their admission decision, they certainly can submit them. We're seeing a dramatic rise in students who are applying test optional this year, as expected, simply because of access to those tests. So that feels just fine. And it, again, won't affect their admission or their aid decision at all. One other thing that I should have mentioned and didn't in terms of ways that we're seeking to serve students and just, I think, connect with students is in this virtual format. We didn't used to do a lot of virtual interviews of any kind, but this year we're really using interviews as a call to action for students to engage with us if they're interested in, especially if they want to talk a little bit more in depth about their application and the parts of their application that they feel might look different this year because of COVID. We want them to be able to of course, put as much of that into the Common App as possible. And we know Common App has accommodated that with some special questions this year. But beyond that, we just know that some students want the reassurance of being able to talk to their admission counselor. And so we've greatly expanded the number and scope of admission interviews that we're able to give. And we're really trying to invite students to not be fearful of that word interview, but just see it as an opportunity for them to connect and advocate and have a conversation that will be meaningful to them in terms of clarifying the components of their application.
Great, thank you all. So we'll go ahead and move on to our second question, which is, this year we're all living with unexpected challenges and opportunities. What is working for your team when it comes to support, capacity, and fighting burnout? And what continues to be the greatest challenge? So we'll go ahead and start with you again, Jocelyn.
I forgot about this question. Let's see. The greatest, what's working? So right before everything happened and we went remote, well, let me back up a little context. I serve 2 different directors. So I report to someone in University Marketing and Communications, and then Paul Seeger, our Director of Admissions. And on one side, in my marketing role and capacity, they had implemented Teams, which is, many of you are probably familiar with or have heard of it. If you haven't used it, it's like a Zoom type platform. And so as things were going remote, I asked everyone who reports up through me to also add that on the admission side. And I think that has worked really well from the perspective of being able to kind of, to the best of your ability, recreate that drop-in moment or hallway conversation, or sometimes it's a bathroom conversation where you're just seeing someone and you're like, hey, can you tell me how many people showed up at that event, or what's the date for that, or whatever. So I really appreciate that functionality, and I think that's served us well. There's also like a group chat feature. So like the other day in Seattle, we were having crazy weather and it was like thunder and lightning, and I was like, whoa, how's everyone doing? And people were just chiming in. So again, it was just kind of a fun way to connect. So I think that's been working really well. But on the flip side, and communications related, I think that remains a big challenge. I mean, I had a coffee virtual meetup this morning with a colleague in financial aid who I literally hadn't seen since, excuse me, I don't even know, April, May. I can't recall the last time that I saw him. And it was, you have to be more intentional about those connections. I heard it said the other day that, we've burned through as a group kind of that social capital that we had built up over our time spent together, getting to know one another as colleagues. And the last few months have been super stressful. So how can we continue to build that back up so that we're not just depleting those relationships that we have? So I don't have all the answers, but continuing to figure out those ways and those touch points to make the team feel connected and not on an island like we are right now.
Aren't you doing little classes where you teach each other things too, Jocelyn? Didn't you mention?
Yes, thank you for that reminder. We had a little office retreat the other day, and it was great. We had some how to propagate succulents. So we culled the experts among us, and I got to learn how to do some potting and repotting. And there was Korean cooking class. They had someone from, I didn't go to it, but the Humane Society came and talked about the animals and adoptions, because adoption rates are way up. So just some fun little ways to not talk about work, but bring people together. And especially with our office, and I assume maybe those others of you on the call on the higher ed side, the processing team and the recruitment team, there's different personality types. So finding ways to bring us all together is always fun. And we got to do that the other day. So thanks for that reminder.
Well, I think as challenging as it has been to just do our work in terms of, recruitment and working with students and families, it's been equally as challenging to try to care for our team, our internal team, and stay connected, and just make sure people are doing okay at this very strange time. So I feel like that has been an equal burden to the other to the other side of things. And we definitely don't have the right answers. I think we've been trying to work really hard to keep communication open, and help staff know that they need to communicate when they're feeling overwhelmed, or they need a break, or they need to flex their time. The onslaught of work has been tremendous, and the hours that we can put in is, it's too much. And so trying to find those ways to reduce those loads for people, and allow them the time that they need to just have self-care has been really important. We have continued certain meetings throughout this fall season at a time when we normally would stop meeting because everyone would be out traveling. We've continued to have a weekly staff meeting because we feel the importance of bringing everyone together in the same room at least once a week is really critical. And one of the things I've loved about that, we've always ended that meeting, or for the last few years, we've ended that meeting with kind of that cheesy shout out time when people can just compliment or praise someone for their work or their partnership. And we've noticed just in this recent time, especially this fall, that shout out part of our meeting has gotten longer and longer and longer. The list is just, it's almost taking too much time. It's such a great thing to see how much our staff members are appreciating one another. And I think some of that really comes from this idea that we notice that it's different when we don't actually get to work together, when we don't have those casual conversations that happen because, as Jocelyn just said, we're headed to the lunchroom together or something like that. We miss that. And so I think that appreciation that is building is coming out in our staff meetings, and that feels awfully good. We're also sharing information whenever we can. If someone reads a really good article about self-care or something that excuse me, speaks to this strange time, we're trying to be helpful to one another in that way. And our dean actually last week shared out a really interesting article about surge capacity. Maybe people saw this, but I'll add it to the chat here in a moment. So people might appreciate that as well.
Yeah, I think just to echo some of what Jocelyn and Sue shared, early on right after we sort of all went remote, I was trying to sort of check in. There was so much changing so quickly. I was trying to be very intentional about sharing out with the team. Here's what I know, here are the updates, just kind of fighting that sense of isolation that people were feeling, and things were changing so quickly. We have really been trying to find the silver linings where we can, and look at the opportunities that this whole thing presents. And I think it presents an opportunity to see what teams or what individuals are able to do their work in a remote or more flexible way. We may never go back to things being exactly the way they were before. And while that is a challenge for me in terms of that sense of team and creating that sense of team when you have people in the same physical space, it also presents an opportunity. So we're trying really to look at it that way. At the same time, I also recognize, the increase in sort of mental health struggles, those feelings of isolation. I've also tried to share out resources from our, kind of university and divisional leadership to the team, things that they might find helpful. I find that with Zoom, as a director, I can drop in on certain teams meetings and it's a little less weird maybe, or maybe I just think it's a little less weird than if I just walk into a conference room. That's actually been nice to check in on, what certain teams are doing, and just have that face-to-face time, even if it's over Zoom, that maybe I wouldn't have had in person. We are looking for ways to appreciate and recognize each other, even given how busy it is. And I see one of my team members is on this call, so Erin, don't give it away, but I'm working on some like video tributes that folks will do for each other just to sort of have, and, you know, just that moment to say, here's what I appreciate about this person, or what I like about working with this person. And it's a busy time, but it's just important that we try to find ways to tell each other how we appreciate each other, especially when you're just sitting in front of your computer on your own, many of us all day. So.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I mean, I'm going to guess that my team is by far probably the smallest team of the four of us that are talking here, which has made it a little bit different for us, and in some ways a little bit more manageable. And in some ways, I'm probably a little bit embarrassed because now I've heard, you know, now 3 people in a row give me ideas of things I should have been doing. So it's an interesting challenge. But a couple of points I would make is that one of the biggest challenges, I think, is the outside of admissions stresses that are then now coming into the admissions world. So I would be very surprised, without giving anybody's inside business away, if any of us aren't dealing with significant budget challenges due to COVID-19 that then we have to respond to as leaders in ways that are difficult. So I'm spending far more time in university-wide or college-wide budget meetings, making some really hard decisions right now than maybe I would have previously at this time of year, which is a direct impact of COVID-19. I'm spending far more time. We had a recent surge in COVID-19 cases because I have both the enrollment side of the house and the marketing side of the house, you know, a bunch of time taken away to work on that. So what hasn't gone well is all of the COVID just makes everything harder. So everything is just takes a little bit longer. Meetings take a little bit longer. You're pulled in a few different directions. You don't have that focus that maybe you would typically want to have in a fall around the enrollment effort. So I think that's been probably the biggest challenge in managing the team. I think a couple of things that have worked within that. One is, I think, and I too have a team member that I noticed in the participant list, and so he would, I would guess that he would. I don't want to guess what his point of view would be about this, but I think it's gone a little bit better. Is that we've been pretty transparent in the division about what's actually happening on the COVID front and on the budget front, which are the 2 areas that really talked about. I think the other thing that has gone well, particularly for our younger, less experienced staff members, is that the road warrior part of the job is pretty isolating and pretty lonely, and they haven't needed to experience that in a weird way. So, you know, they haven't been, you know, at a hotel for 2 weeks in a row and, you know, only seeing the same person from the college at the college table next to them for 7 straight days. I mean, it's been a very different experience. And so I feel like what has gone well actually is there's actually probably a greater sense of camaraderie among the actual sort of road warrior counselors. And they've been able to I've been able to call on them about social media strategy or some other strategy in ways that they haven't been able to participate the same way in the fall. So in some ways, I think it's been good for their professional development and good for us to be able to really get that not quite so isolating when you first get hired into that admissions role. So I'd sure like to find a way to maintain that next fall as students, or as those groups hit the road, as they continue to kind of meet the way that we've been able to meet in the fall, just because everybody's simply been around. So that's been really positive.
Thank you all so much for sharing so much of what's going on. Before I open it up for discussions, are there any final things our panelists would like to add on, having heard everybody else speak?
Oh, sorry, Jocelyn. I guess just one thing I wanted to say is, you know, I mostly talked about challenges within our team, sort of looking inward, but looking outward, of course, no shortage of challenges, in that our normal sort of partners in all of this, you know, high school counselors, folks on the high school side, they're not in regular contact with students in the same way. And of course, we're seeing that that's protracting out these activities that would normally be happening in the month of October, and just making everything more difficult, like Chado said. So I guess I just want to say openly that we just really value our partners on the high school side. And if there are ways that that we can serve students better or ideas that you have, we just look forward to talking more about that. Our normal channels in working with students, at least here in our area, are eroded. And so we're just looking at new and different ways of trying to assist students and assist them on their timeline, recognizing that the normal timeline might not be what we're dealing with. It probably isn't what we're dealing with this year. Thank you.
I was just going to add too, along the lines of the silver lining, there are so many things that we weren't doing that were quickly illuminated in this environment, and things that we weren't doing online, I should say. And it was pretty incredible to see how quickly resources were made available so that we could do the things that many of our peers are doing online. And so in some weird way, there are positives to the fact that we now have a more robust website, more resources, more tools, and we are seeing places like our international student population that a lot of our counseling colleagues are saying, thanks, they could never come visit your campus, but now you're working to have a virtual campus tour, something we'd never had before, as a small example. But so a few benefits of this situation.
Great. So at this time, we'd really like to hear and have our audience participate in this. And so if you have questions that you would like to ask of the panel, or we also welcome just sharing insight as to how things are going for you, what's working in your office among your colleagues. So I really want to just make this an open discussion. And so we'll have a couple ways to do that. So you're welcome to use the chat feature, and I will read out the question to our panelists, or use the raise hand function in your, and then I'll call on participants just to kind of keep some level of organization. So we'll go ahead and just open it up now, and we'd really love to hear from you guys. So Amanda is sharing that one benefit is that the school district is just doing district-wide college rep visits. And so it's open access across the district, and student attendance is looking pretty good. Yeah, that's something that we're seeing in my district as well. So thanks for sharing that.
I would say those have been great from the college side too. Just the efficiency of knowing that we're connecting with, or at least making our time available to an entire district at the same time. It's been great.
Colton, yeah, if you want to go ahead and unmute and pose your question, or if you're typing it, I can't tell.
Hey, yeah. So I'm Colton. I work at WSU Vancouver. We work with students primarily in Southwest Washington. And I was just curious to hear from other folks. We are having some turnout at our virtual events. However, these are from students who typically have support at home to work through the barriers of the admissions process. And so what are other institutions doing to access students who come from marginalized and underrepresented populations when we can't go meet with them face to face and they're not showing up for Zoom appointments or virtual events? Any ideas? We've tried mailings, texting, calling, different types of events. And so curious to hear how folks are working with our most vulnerable populations.
So Colton, let me start with that. And actually partially because it's fun to hear from you, because I used to live just down the street. So my last job was actually at Clark College, just down the street from you guys at WSUV. The thing that I've been really surprised is that when we did those Zoom meetings for parents in the evenings, is the number of first generation parents represented in that was actually, they far outrepresented every other group. And our approach with that has been to go out and to say, this parent meeting is about the admissions process, and being very specific about the fact that we think we're going to give you information that applies to any college that you would apply to. So we do certainly talk about admissions specific to Carroll, But we really talked more about just the admission process in general, and largely we've had first generation students. We actually added a second night with my financial aid director to talk about specifically about financial aid. But again, that training was really how to fill out the FAFSA. It wasn't really about Carroll's financial aid, because we just feel like in the fall, students or parents are more sort of generally looking. And that seems to have been as good a strategy as we have landed on to reach those first generation. And I wonder if, and I would have to test this theory out a little bit, but the other thing is that parents that maybe wouldn't have been used to Zoom before are now used to Zoom before. So I think my initial theory was, boy, if we do these Zoom meetings for parents, what we're going to get is we're going to get professional parents who sent their kids to college already. And it didn't turn out that way. Of the 5 sessions that we held for parents this fall, I did polls in all of them to find out who was sending their first child to college, or who was actually hadn't gone to college themselves but was first generation, and was very surprised that actually I think our biggest attenders at those were students that would be in that first generation or underrepresented category.
Colton, and just to add to Chato's comments, you know, I don't know that we found any magic recipe here, but one thing that we started doing actually pre-COVID was there's a local Spanish language radio station here in the Treasure Valley, and one of our staff, who's the coordinator of multicultural recruitment, takes part in an hour-long educational radio show where she's sort of talking about higher education in general and FAFSA and sort of important next steps, but also representing Boise State as well. And that has generated some follow-up calls and emails, and so she's able to do that, work with families one-on-one in Spanish, particularly for parents who find that more advantageous. And we also have, as part of our kind of lineup of different virtual options, we also have Spanish, one-on-one virtual visits. They're mostly one-on-one is what we find. And that's just sort of within that first generation group. That's just sort of one particular strategy that we found this working pretty well. Radio is a pretty important conduit, particularly for the Latinx community. So that's been exciting to see.
I just have one other thing that we've just started to do, and I have early reports of that it's going well, is that our multicultural outreach and recruitment team has been doing kind of an Ask Me Anything equivalent on Instagram. So targeting students from underrepresented backgrounds, and that's been a easy interactive way to try to reach some students that otherwise maybe they wouldn't see in a Zoom call per se or any other visit. And then similar to what Kelly was saying, doing sessions in Spanish has been successful. We've tried that. And then on top of the radio stations and advertising there, or doing the PSAs, churches are also places that you can advertise. Actually, they do charge a small fee in some places, but that is for Chicano Latino student recruitment a great source. So something to think about or explore.
One thing that we've done, and it's not very carefully measured, so I couldn't tell you numbers in terms of who we've been in contact with, but I attended the Oregon Aspire virtual conference several weeks ago, and it was great interaction with lots of high school counselors and mentors. And through that, I was invited to do several essay writing workshops with AVID classes, and just a number of classes that I think touch our first generation college students or college seeking students. And so I think just having a willingness and an interest in connecting with high school teachers, not just counselors, but teachers who are looking for some of that content that will serve those particular populations, we've been really open to that and trying to serve that need, even though, as my other colleagues have said, I'm not talking about Willamette, we're just talking about the college knowledge kind of stuff that is overarching and is, I think, most important for those families that are maybe new to this process. So we've been trying to make ourselves very available through that kind of format.
Can I just add one thing about the essay writing? So when I'm also on the PNACAC board, and we're exploring avenues for the college fair. We were looking at StriveScan, and they had shared some statistics with us, and their #1 most attended session was essay writing workshop. Okay, we are now ending our second week, going into our third week of PNACAC fairs. Same thing, the highest attendance for both weeks has been essay writing. And I can say at UW, when we did our Washington Wednesdays, highest attendance essay writing workshop. So I don't know, I'm starting to think like that's the ticket to get, even if you're not talking about your institution, like that's the golden ticket to get in there and get in front of those students.
Thanks for raising that question, Colton. I think we all learned quite a bit from that and just what's the vast experience. Are there other questions or comments that any of our audience would like to share? And I was telling the panel, I just spent 4 hours teaching. I teach some high school classes and stare at blank Zoom screens. So I'm really good with that awkward silence while you guys are processing. However, I won't keep us for the 20 minutes that we have until 3 o'clock. So give you just another couple, 30 seconds or so. If you do have some questions, we'll bring them up to the group. But if we have shared everything we feel like we need to share, we'll get you out of here and you can actually start your happy hour. All right. So I'm going to just do a quick screen share. So you all have access to the presenter's contact information should you wish to have any follow-up dialogue with any of our presenters or myself on the professional development side. And then I'm also going to be putting into the chat just a brief survey that I would really love if you could take a minute to fill out, just seeking input for topics for future webinars or interest if you're interested in presenting a webinar or have some colleagues who would be great presenters. I'd really love to get that information to be able to continue with these webinars and being able to interact with people. So once again, a really big thank you to our panelists and thank you so much to those of you attending. And with that, I wish you all a wonderful day and a wonderful weekend. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.